As Terry Rozier signs an NBA extension and other players around the league continue to cash in, we look at why Mikal Bridges and Deandre Ayton have not done so, what that could mean for them and for the team, and why it might work out after all on today's episode of Locked On Phoenix Suns.
It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. I am your host, Brendon Kleen. I cover the Suns and the NBA at SB Nation as well as Dime Magazine. Follow me on Twitter at Brendon Kleen 14. Follow the show on Twitter at Locked On PHX Suns. And it's Extension Talk Day here on a Friday edition of Locked On Suns. Getting your daily dose of the Phoenix Suns every single weekday here on the show. And Mikal Bridges, Deandre Ayton still have not signed their extensions. Terry Rozier, guys like that continue to cash in, as I said. And it begs the question of what is going on? Why have we not seen the Suns' young players cash in? So we'll start with Deandre Ayton. We'll get to Mikal Bridges, and then we'll close the show with what might happen, how it could actually help the Suns in the long term, even if it might not potentially help the players themselves. Just sort of lay the landscape out here, because it has been about 2 weeks since NBA free agency opened. It feels like much, much more than that. I guess it's about 2.5, but time does indeed fly. And no deals for Mikal Bridges or Deandre Ayton. So let's start with Ayton. I do want to preface everything by saying 2018 draft, those are the players eligible for rookie scale contract extensions. They've played for 3 seasons. Before their 4th season, which will be starting in a couple of months, they have the chance to sign an extension. It was eligible to be signed basically a few hours after the start of free agency. It is eligible to be signed up until the end of October. There's always that deadline day when these things either do or do not get done. Some do wait that long. So it's not over until it's over. But the delay speaks volumes, in my opinion, particularly with Deandre Ayton. But let's go over who has and who has not signed these deals across the NBA really quickly first, so that we can understand the landscape a little bit better. So Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Trae Young, and Luka Doncic are the yeses. Those players are signed. All of them got a max contract. They are off of the table. Now, players who have not signed those extensions, who, for all intents and purposes, have a relatively similar pedigree to Ayton and Bridges, maybe not finals players, but very good players in their own right, who have not yet signed those types of contracts. Michael Porter Jr., Jaren Jackson Jr., who was, of course, the number 4 overall pick, and Colin Sexton and Kevin Huerter. So we saw and heard the trade discussions with, rumors or interest on Colin Sexton. We know that Jaren Jackson has struggled with injuries. Kevin Huerter also dealt with injuries this past season. Michael Porter Jr., very similar. So in terms of good players on great teams, you would say Huerter and Porter Jr. are the most similar to Ayton and Bridges. So there is at least some sort of comparison to be made in terms of what it is that is happening around the NBA. Bridges and Ayton are not on their own in this boat. But Ayton in particular, I think the timing is very interesting. The fact that it did not happen right away, when you see the deals that did happen right away were maxes, and that always is what happens. Jamal Murray last season, Ben Simmons last season, I believe Pascal Siakam in 2019, and then in 2020 we had Bam Adebayo and these types of guys. And it always happens immediately. De'Aaron Fox, Jason Tatum. It always happens right away, right? So when it doesn't happen right away, what that says to me is that it's probably not going to be a max contract. because the no-brainer maxes tend to happen right away. So what I would say that means is that there is a push and pull happening between Deandre Ayton's camp and his agent Neiman Amakian and the Suns camp. And we've already seen on every contract, I guess, aside from, you could make the case, JaVale McGee, there has basically been a real victory on the part of the Suns and some squeezing that has happened. Some, go find your market. Oh, wait, there isn't one. Yes, come back and here's your money. And it's going to be less than maybe what you had hoped. That has happened with Chris Paul and with Cameron Payne, and it might be what's happening here with Deandre Ayton. The Suns probably have a number in their head that feels a lot more reasonable. They can probably look at Deandre Ayton and say, where is the production that would earn you that spot with the max contract? I've been using the Bam Adebayo deal as a comparison, obviously, for obvious reasons. A finals run, a young center, a two-way player. I do think Bam is still a little bit better than Deandre Ayton because he's more of a playmaker and probably on the whole a better defensive player, at least as things currently stand, understanding he is a little bit older. So that probably is gone now as a comparison, at least in terms of what the expectation should be. I would guess that is probably the case that Ayton's camp is making, but I don't think it's probably the most likely scenario anymore. I think a few things play into that. Obviously, the delay here that we're talking about is one. I think the other part of it that I don't even want to say worries me, because I don't personally have a stake in how much money DeAndre Ayton makes, and I think paying him less is probably more favorable to the Suns. So most Suns fans will probably root for flexibility for their team, and paying Ayton less would give them that. But I think his finish to the season, which we talked about a little bit with Damon on Monday's show, which you can check out on the YouTube channel or wherever you listen to podcasts. It didn't end great, right? I mean, I don't really want to get too caught up in the Giannis matchup in particular, but I do think that there is a legitimacy to looking at the offensive creation issues, which are clearly there, and the inability to defend a face-up isolation perimeter-based big man scorer like Giannis or Anthony Davis. Those were two matchups he faced that he did not succeed in quite the same way, Ayton, and especially the inability to do that without fouling. These are developmental areas of his game that I'm optimistic can improve, but I don't think if you're doing a negotiation right now, he can't come to them and say, I have accomplished this, this, and that. He also will have the track record that most recently led to a pretty disappointing performance in the finals. So all of that to say, the delay, that reality of his performance, and the fact that last season was really the only time he had effectively proven over and over consistently that he is a great player, leads me to believe we're back to the realm of the lower comparison contracts. And there's not really anybody on a deal like this currently in the NBA, but we've seen it in the past. Think Giannis Antetokounmpo, Rudy Gobert, their first extensions prior to signing their max contracts was shorter, wasn't the 5 years, and it was a little bit less than their maximum. So both of those players signed about 4-year, $100 million extensions because, similar to DeAndre Ayton in some ways, although not the same exact trajectory, they were slower to come along. Rudy was thin. He didn't have much of an offensive game. Still, you could argue, doesn't have a superior offensive game. And Giannis, of course, coming out of Greece, being a very, very raw player and needing to physically fill out. That's where we are. And the fact that those players are great players makes it a lot easier. It's not, to me, I don't think it's quite as insulting to come to DeAndre Ayton and say, this is what we'd like to pay you. It's more than a Miles Turner. It's more than a Brook Lopez. That's the comp that I was giving for most of the regular season. What he did in the playoffs earned him a lot, but I don't think it's the max. I think it's going to settle in around there. We'll close the show talking about what could come of this and what might happen, but I think that's where things currently stand. We did not see it get signed right away. That to me says it's not going to be a max. I think that is probably accurate given what he has done in the NBA and what he is coming off of last season, and we'll have to see how it develops. I'm not positive that it necessarily gets done anytime soon. We'll talk about that again to close the show, but a lot of you were pretty confident that it will happen by opening night. We'll have to see. The other guy, of course, who is being negotiated with at the same time as Mikal Bridges, we'll get into what may or may not happen with him coming out of the break. First, though, quick break from our friends at BetOnline.ag. BetOnline is the fastest and the easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports, whether that is NFL preseason. If you really live and die by this stuff, I'm sure you are thrilled for the return of football. Maybe it's baseball, stretch run. Maybe it is fights, golf, whatever it is, BetOnline has you covered. Constantly updated news, sign-up bonuses, and contest info to get you into the loop. So before the next pitch, kickoff, tip-off, whatever it may be, head over to BetOnline, make a bet, get in on the action, and have some fun. The way to do that is to go, once again, to betonline.ag on the web or on their mobile app. Make an account, and when you do, use the promo code LOCKEDON to get a 50% welcome bonus straight to your account. That's promo code LOCKEDON when you make your first deposit to get a 50% welcome bonus straight to your account. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. Okay, let's get to Mikal Bridges, who I want to make some comparisons here as well, because I think the Suns' own history is relevant here. So coming off of that Robin Lopez, beat myself to it. Coming off of the Deandre Ayton conversation, Robin Lopez is a very reasonable comparison to look at. So this was back in 2012, was his deadline to be offered a new contract, and he did not get offered one. The Suns decided not to make an agreement with him, probably some give and take with what it was that he wanted. He, of course, eventually leaves the team. The other comparison that will get us on the Mikal Bridges track is TJ Warren. And I think people forget that happened because he was given away for very little, actually nothing, a couple of years after he signed the deal. But Warren did sign a 4-year, $50 million contract extension in the fall of 2017. This is actually right before I started doing this podcast, which makes me feel some existential dread, if I'm being completely honest with everybody. But that's not important. TJ Warren's contract extension came after quite a delay. September 25th, basically right as training camp was breaking, if you'll remember. And I think it was right after Media Day. I remember it being very close to Suns Media Day, and it was a really reasonable contract extension. Now, very little is similar here. No more Ryan McDonough. This was prior to James Jones even being part of this organization. Trevor Buckstein is still around. He is the Suns cap guy. So the Suns have had some decent success when they have chosen to do deals like this. Obviously, Devin Booker, just getting him to return was pretty good. And then what they've been able to do this offseason in terms of getting Payne and Paul back, there is a track record of some of these things going in the Suns' favor. And I think, again, with the Warren contract, it's that delay that you look at, right? So not that we ever thought Mikal Bridges was going to go out and get a major contract extension. But again, if the player and the team come to an agreement immediately, that tends to mean that it's going to be a pretty hefty deal. And like I've said, for the most part, it is maximum players who get it right away. But I also think this shows with Warren that it doesn't have to happen right away, and there can still be a happy medium that's found. There's also contracts that get signed at the extension deadline every single offseason. OG Anunoby, for example, I believe was one of those, and he's been a guy that a lot of people have compared Mikal Bridges to in terms of what the contract might look like. What I also think is worth comparing here, as we talk about Mikal Bridges, what he might be in store for, who his contract could take after. I think that you're seeing a lot of extensions happening. And we'll get to that to close the show because I think it's all part of a trend here. Just from talking to folks around the league and reading, I would recommend people go read Dan Devine's story at The Ringer. It's about Terry Rozier's extension, but it's really about NBA free agency as it currently stands. What did we see this offseason? What do we see next offseason, and why? And Rozier signed a 4-year, $97 million contract extension this morning, on Thursday morning. And that deal was 4 years, $97 million. It's huge. It's huge. And we've seen players get some of these extensions earlier and to a more lucrative degree than many of us might have thought. I believe there was another one just a few days ago that was quote unquote a max, Marcus Smart. And so those are not quite the same types of players as Mikal Bridges. But what I think the story is here in some ways is the flexibility that teams want to have. And so if we can operate with that delay in mind, understanding that Mikal Bridges is probably not going to get his Jaylen Brown over $100 million mega deal, because again, like Ayton, and to an even greater extent than Ayton, he is not coming off of a performance in the postseason and the finals that he can really bargain on all that well. If we look at that, and we look at the fact that a lot of these teams are seeking out the flexibility of having decent, if slightly excessive, salaries on the books, then I think we should feel pretty optimistic that both sides will want to get something done for Mikal Bridges, because Mikal, I think, is a loyal dude. I think he understands that he's in a very good position to succeed here. Now, Mikal Bridges could be great anywhere, but I think he, like Cameron Payne, in my opinion, is a guy who is probably willing to compromise a little bit and without it causing wrinkles in things, without it causing problems, without it being a locker room issue. So I feel optimistic that something will happen. I feel optimistic something will happen with Deandre Ayton as well. So both of these guys should be signed by opening night. I do agree. I think it was about 75 to 80% of you in the Twitter poll that I put out at Locked On PHX Suns agreed and said yes to whether each of these guys would get a contract extension. But I want to get to the last segment soon, because I think we're getting to the what will happen and why part of this. But I think the things to think about with Bridges are it's not going to be quite as big as we thought, just like with Ayton. And I think that OG Anunoby contract may be really where the Suns look. So the Jonathan Isaac, I believe, was 4 years, 80, probably somewhere in that range. And I think that again, like Ayton, it's not insulting. It's not an insulting number. Those guys have had similar production to him. They are also players who helped become part of a young core with their organizations. OG in Toronto, Isaac in Orlando. They're sort of some of the young faces of their franchises, just like Bridges would be. So I think you're not coming and saying, take the TJ Warren contract. Nobody is thinking that way, but I think it's not going to be quite as huge, and it's going to be somewhere in the middle. And that leads me to the last point that's really going to be the last segment here, which is the contract for Ayton, but especially the contract for Bridges. What it means is that it's very team friendly for both. Just it's not as much money as it could have been, but also it's very, very tradable. And we're seeing a new run on those types of contracts. That's part of why somebody like Boston or Charlotte would look at Rozier and Smart and say, sure, let's just do the extension, keep these guys happy, lock a good player in long-term, but also have salaries that we are comfortable moving around. So we'll get into that in just a moment. First, though, a quick word from our friends over at Rock Auto. Look, guys, I know it is pretty much impossible, frankly, to walk into a dealership or a car parts store these days. Trust that you're going to get what you need at a reasonable price. It just doesn't happen. You walk in, you tell them what you have, you tell them what's broken, what needs repair, what needs replacing, and they just look for ways to screw you. You're not going to be ordering in bulk. You're not going to be ordering necessarily the cheapest thing in the world, and they know that. So Rock Auto cuts all of the middleman, all of the drama right out of the picture. They have been serving auto parts customers online for 20 years. They know what it takes to get the right things to you. They know how to keep prices cheap, and they know what do-it-yourselfers need, right? It's not going to be the fanciest thing. It's not going to be the shiniest, most expensive part. They know you need what you need quickly, cheaply, and efficiently. So all you got to do to take advantage of Rock Auto, you don't need an account, you don't need a subscription. You just go to rockauto.com, type in the car that you have, scroll down to the part that you need, hit purchase, and it's at your door within days. Here's what you need to do. Go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck. And when you make your purchase, write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, and all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Today's show also brought to you by Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar ever, my favorite protein bar, and more accurately, the healthiest candy bar ever. Again, I told you guys I'm finishing off the box that I was fortunate enough to get at a recent meeting with these guys because they really do care about the Valley. I'll talk about that in just a second, but I'm just completely swallowing down a coconut bar. And I'm literally thinking to myself, is this an Almond Joy or am I going crazy? It is that good. It is that delicious. It is that soft. These things are not bricky, chalky messes like so many protein bars are. No, they are delicious. They are packed with protein, under 180 calories, under 5 grams of sugar, exactly what you need to get your morning started, to get yourself going in the afternoon, power up after a workout, whatever way you use protein bars, these will work for that as well. And best of all, like I said, they are opening a distribution center here in the Valley so you can get your bars right to where you live as quickly as possible. Try another favorite. Go back to the well and get what you love, whether that is strawberry, coconut, like I was just talking about, maybe mint brownie, or try something new. Summertime flavors, orange, cookies and cream, whatever it may be. Tons of delicious options over at Built Bar. And use the promo code LOCKED15 when you go to Built.com to get a 15% discount on your next order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Okay, closing out the show here, again, plugging the Dan Devine piece over at The Ringer. I think it talks a lot about these things, but the main point is we're seeing a lot of these extensions, and the main method by which players move around these days is by trade. We've seen this with the Miami Heat for many years now, where they seemingly pull a rabbit out of the hat because they have either non-guaranteed contracts, mid-sized contracts that are tradable, young players on rookie contracts, draft picks way down the road. They seemingly find a way to make these deals all of the time. I was talking about it a little bit yesterday in terms of the youth to close yesterday's show about how the Suns getting younger was quietly a very important part of the season or of the offseason for them. All of it goes together. If they can get Mikal Bridges on a smaller contract, let's say just to split the difference, it's halfway between the OG Anunoby contract and the Jonathan Isaac contract. Let's say it's 4 years, $76 million. Maybe they throw a player option on there just to go ahead and entice Bridges a little bit more. Let's say, again, with that Gobert and Giannis comparison in mind for the Suns, that they go out there and get those two guys, Ayton on a 4-year, $100 million deal. Let's say he gets a player option as well. So tradable because they're 25 and 17 or 18 million dollars, 19, whatever it is for Bridges per, that's $44 million of salary. You can start to stack some money together in that way. Now, again, I will mention a few extra things within that. By signing an extension, the Suns can then turn around next offseason and immediately trade these players. Not that I expect it, but it gives them that flexibility. Whereas if they were to wait and either have Ayton and Bridges test restricted free agency, which would be an alarm going off, or just sign a new contract with them at that time after their fourth season is basically complete, they would not be able to trade those players until basically the following offseason or sometime between there during the season. So it gives them that added flexibility. All of this is shaping up to basically allow the Suns to be way more flexible than they've been able to be in the past, because they had Oubre and Rubio, who were effectively the only contracts that they had on the books that were tradable last offseason. They turned those into Chris Paul. Coming into this offseason, they really didn't have much at all because they had Jay Crowder and they had Dario Saric, but they need Crowder and they couldn't really trade Saric. And Chris Paul and Devin Booker make a ton of money and aren't available to be dealt. So there wasn't a lot of money to be assembled into a package. They will have that now. They also obviously have players who are going to be making a reasonable amount of money who are not overpaid. So that obviously helps as well. all of it is benefiting the team, but that's not all that matters, right? So very good for the team. The fact that there has been this delay, the way that the other extensions have been shaping up, the fact that there's not a ton of free agency salary cap space next year or players who will be available. We'll just have a pretty quiet free agency period next summer because of all of these extensions and just the nature of not a lot of players are available or even projected to be available. So that's the team side. Things are shaping up very well for the Suns to have flexibility, get these guys at a reasonable rate. And if for whatever reason they find a superstar available, they aren't happy with the current roster, they'll have the ability to trade it a little bit more easily. But on the player side, I do think it's worth mentioning because this stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum. I am typically very much on the side of players being able to get what they've earned. And I definitely don't think, despite my concerns and intrigue about where Deandre Ayton's career might go, that he's like not somebody who should be getting a new contract. I definitely think a 4-year, $100 million or so deal is well within reason. So he should get that. But I think there's obviously the risk when you compound the Chris Paul situation, the Cameron Payne situation, the fact that those guys made very little money. Not very little money. That's obviously an exaggeration. They made less than they could have, less than they were expected to. And we could see something similar play out in the near future with Deandre Ayton and Mikal Bridges. It starts to... it's the right thing to do from a team management standpoint in terms of the pure numbers. But I do just think, and not to be so cynical about it, I know I can get on these rolls where I'm just really rolling in it. But for a front office that tries so hard to affect the way that their players and their organization is perceived in terms of how it treats players, not wanting to call players pieces, for instance, and just these different ways of talking about things, the fact that this organization is also the one squeezing some of these players and paying them less and prolonging negotiations, it is, again, fair, perfectly within reason, and paying them what they're worth. But it is also a fact that it is less than they could make. It's not a max. It's not the high end of what they might get if things go this way. And so that brings about, what is the culture going to be like? The culture is very easy to build in 2019 when it's Ricky Rubio and the kids who are proving themselves, making very little money, hungry to win, hungry for their next contract. It's a wholly different thing to keep players happy, to keep players engaged, to keep players from quarreling when money gets involved, when high-level money, high-level expectations, high-level stress comes into play. And, Deandre Ayton is a player who told us right there at the beginning of his career that getting this second contract was something that was very important to him, something he was very much looking forward to. And look, Mikal Bridges is a winning player who has proven himself, improved, and been a massive part of the identity of this team. Not paying those guys, I don't know if it will go quite as well as it has with Cameron Payne. I talked about how him giving an interview and talking about how he was never going to leave and all this and being okay with the money situation was a promising step for the culture. But you start to compound these and you risk stepping on a little bit of a landmine when it comes to, are you keeping guys happy? Is everybody on the same page? Is everybody understanding of the facts of the situation? So it may help the Suns in terms of roster building. It may be fair. But the reality is anyone who's underpaid or feels underpaid is going to react to that in one way or another. They're either going to accept it and learn to live with it, or it's going to wear on them and just be something that is in the back of their mind. So a lot at stake, a lot to chew on, and a lot that will really define not only in the numbers of everything, but also the emotions of everything, the future of this franchise. What will this team look like? How will it look together? And what can it do going forward, aside from the internal development stuff that I talked about with Damon? How these guys progress as players is enormously important, but this stuff really, really matters too. And it's something the Suns haven't had to deal with in a long, long time, something that we haven't had to talk about or think about as Suns fans in a long time. Players took a lot of money to come here because the Suns had to overpay and everyone else made chump change because they were rookies who were treated as disposable. This is a different phase of team building. This is a different phase of roster building, and it's fascinating. And I hope that these guys are able to cash in. I hope that the two sides can come to something that nobody has their feelings hurt and the team can continue to improve down the line. But it doesn't always work that way. It's not always that easy. And as more time ticks, I think Suns fans understandably get a little bit nervous. So just wanted to address that today, get you through the weekend with some of that. Again, subscribe to the YouTube page if you have not already. That's Locked On Suns on YouTube. Wherever you're listening, please do the same. Kelly Oubre bobblehead could be yours if we get when we get to 1,000 subscribers here on the YouTube channel. I'm going every day through the end of the month, so you will not miss me at all. And then we'll slow things down a bit until we get to training camp. But thank you for listening. As always, enjoy your weekend, and I'll be back Monday with my man Brandon.